When my wife realized she'd been caught cheating, she panicked and started begging me for forgiveness. But honestly, she's going to have to deal with the consequences of her actions. I first figured out what she was up to about 7 months ago. Let me tell you, it was brutal. I went through the whole emotional roller coaster: heartache, denial, the endless suffering. I even found myself bending over backward, trying to win back her attention like some lovesick fool. For months, I was stuck in this dark pit of depression. I never confronted her directly, though. She had to have known that I'd pieced it all together. But you know what? She clearly didn't care. Fast forward a few months to about 2 or 3 months ago, and I'd finally hit my breaking point. I was just done. Done with her, done with our marriage, done with pretending like everything was fine. I stopped caring altogether and started focusing on what came next. Preparing for a divorce and building a new life for myself. I completely checked out of our relationship. I avoided her as much as I could. If I knew she was going to be home, I made sure I wasn't. On the rare occasions when I couldn't avoid her, I kept our conversations to the bare minimum. My answers were limited to things like, yes, no, maybe, or the classic, I don't know. I even left bills from divorce attorneys lying around where she couldn't miss them. She must have realized I wasn't just drifting away. I was actively planning to leave. And it wasn't just her noticing the cracks in our marriage. Even the kids could tell something was up. One day I sat them down and gave them that talk. You know, the one where you try to reassure your kids that it's not their fault. I said something like, "Your mom and I both love you so much, but sometimes adults just can't stay together." My wife was in the room while I said all this. She heard every word, but she didn't say a single thing. No objections, no comments, nothing. Her silence? I took it as her way of agreeing that this marriage was done. A few days ago, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. A girl I knew back in high school, long before I met my wife. Her name's not Monica, but let's call her that because, honestly, she kind of reminds me of Monica Bellucci. Back then, there was definitely something between us. We had this easy chemistry. Flirting, playful touches, but it never went beyond that. I didn't have the guts to make a move, and before I could work up the courage, her family moved away. I was young, awkward, and honestly pretty clueless. For a long time, I kicked myself over it. I hadn't thought about Monica in forever, and I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen her. But when we bumped into each other, it was like no time had passed. That spark, it was still there. We spent a while catching up, and I told her about my situation. I made it clear that I was still married, though barely hanging on to the idea of it. I wasn't about to cross any lines, and Monica respected that. She gave me her number and said, "Call me when you've finalized everything. I'd love to get to know you again." She also mentioned that she'd never been married and was really interested in seeing where this could go. And honestly, I felt the same. Meeting her stirred something in me. It made me realize I couldn't keep living this half-life. When I got home that day, I was practically buzzing with energy. I felt lighter than I had in months, like I finally had a direction. Sitting in the living room, I waited for my wife to get home. By the time she walked in, I couldn't wipe the grin off my face. "Can we talk?" I asked her, my heart pounding but my voice steady. We sat down and I told her everything. I said I'd known about her cheating for a while, months actually. "I figured you guessed I knew," I added. "Especially since I've been so checked out these past few months, and you didn't seem to care." A few days ago, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since high school. A girl I knew back before I ever met my wife. There was always this spark between us back then, a chemistry that was impossible to ignore. We'd flirt, find excuses to touch, but we never actually crossed the line. Let's call her Monica, mostly because she reminds me of Monica Bellucci. Monica and her family moved away before I could work up the nerve to act on how I felt. I regretted it for a long time, but hey, I was young, shy, and honestly kind of clueless back then. I hadn't thought about Monica in years, let alone seen her. But the moment we reconnected, it was like nothing had changed. The same tension was there, undeniable and electric. As we caught up, I told her I was still married, though the relationship was as good as over. I made it crystal clear I wasn't about to cheat, and Monica respected that. She handed me her number and said, "Call me when everything's finalized. I'd love to get to know you again." She mentioned she'd never been married and was genuinely interested in exploring what could happen between us. Honestly, I was just as interested. Meeting Monica was the push I needed to finally face the reality of my situation and take action. When I got home, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time in a long while, I was excited about the future. I sat in the living room, practically grinning like an idiot, waiting for my wife to come home. When she walked in, I asked her to sit down because we needed to talk. My heart was pounding, but I stayed calm. I told her I'd known about her cheating for months. "I assumed you knew that I knew," I said, "especially since I've been so disconnected from us these past few months, and you didn't seem to care." Then I dropped the bombshell. "I think it's time for us both to move on. I want to start seeing someone else and begin a new chapter in my life." I ended by saying, "All things considered, I think it's time for us to get a divorce. Don't you agree?" Her reaction? It wasn't anything like what I expected. She started crying. No, it wasn't just crying. It was this raw, gut-wrenching, desperate kind of wailing that I'd never heard before. It wasn't just tears. It was like her soul was coming apart right in front of me. Through her sobbing, she started mumbling excuses, barely making sense. She was begging me for a second chance, saying the affair didn't mean anything, that we could have worked things out if we'd gone to couples therapy. It was all this stuff I didn't know she'd been bottling up. I just sat there, stunned. I'd honestly thought she'd be relieved, like this was what she wanted all along. So I said, "Look, now you can be with him without any guilt. Clearly, he's more important to you than this family." And then I asked her, point blank, "If that's not true, why'd you go to him? You had to know it would destroy our relationship. Are you really that blind to what you've done?" I told her, calmly but firmly, that if she had really cared about saving our marriage and keeping our family intact, she should have done something 7 months ago, before she decided to cheat. At this point, it's too late. The damage is done, and there's no fixing it. Then I laid it out. "I didn't even realize we had problems in our marriage. You never talked to me. I'm not a mind reader. How was I supposed to fix something I didn't know was broken? And clearly, you thought something was so wrong, so broken, that it couldn't be solved just by talking to me. It had to be so bad that you were willing to risk everything, our family, our kids' stability, for this affair. If that's not the case, why did you do it?" I explained to her as clearly as I could that there's no going back. You can't undo what you did with him. You can't erase the pain and suffering you've caused me. That pain has brought me to the point where I don't care anymore. In fact, I probably hate you now. I kept my voice steady, even though I felt like screaming. "I'm only staying civil for the sake of our kids, so we can co-parent without making their lives harder. But as far as you and me go, it's over. And honestly, I don't believe you ever really cared about me. Because if you did, you wouldn't have hurt me like this. You wouldn't have betrayed me like this. The words, 'I love you,' mean absolutely nothing when your actions scream the opposite." At that point, she completely broke down. She was crying so hard I couldn't even make sense of what she was saying anymore. She wasn't even speaking coherently. I realized I couldn't deal with this on my own, so I called her sister. When she got to the house, I explained what was going on, and she took my wife with her. Frankly, I wasn't about to take care of her after everything she'd done. When they finally left, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief, like I could finally breathe again after 7 suffocating months. For the first time in what felt like forever, it was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I don't even know why I'm writing all this down. Maybe I'm just trying to make sense of it. She had to have known this was coming, right? I mean, she couldn't seriously believe that her choices, the lies, the betrayal, would lead to anything but divorce and a fractured family. She's not stupid. She's smart, beautiful, and up until she started the affair, our marriage had been good, great, even. But now, I've accepted that life changes, and I've moved past the worst of it. So why is she pretending all of a sudden? Pretending she loves me, that she wants to stay together, that she cares about keeping this family whole? What's her motivation? Could it be about alimony? In my country, I'm pretty sure that with all the evidence I have of her cheating, she wouldn't be entitled to any. Is that what she's worried about? Or maybe she's scared I'll tell people what she did. Maybe even tell her lover's wife. I can't figure it out. Is she trying to guilt me into keeping quiet? Hoping I'll pity her so I don't expose the truth? Her lover is married, after all. Could she be terrified of the fallout if his wife finds out? I don't know. I've gone over it so many times in my head. But none of it makes sense. I just needed to get it all out somehow, hoping that by laying everything bare, it would start to make sense. 3 days after that conversation with her, I wrote my first post. Honestly, I hadn't slept much since then. I was running on fumes, trying to process everything. I ended up passing out at my desk, face planted right on the keyboard. When I woke up, there was a nice little imprint on my face, but something about that sleep, however short it was, made everything feel just a little clearer. That's when I decided to get organized. I grabbed some paper and started making lists. I hung them on the wall like some kind of detective solving a case. Each paper had its own heading: Our children, how to behave when you meet your wife, my marriage, Monica, questions to ask your wife, and so on. The final list was huge, too much to explain in detail, but it was all about narrowing things down to the core principles I value. I wanted to focus on what really mattered and figure out what I could realistically accomplish in each situation. For each item, I asked myself what a meaningful outcome would look like and how I could achieve it. It was a weirdly therapeutic process. Writing it all down, seeing it laid out in front of me, made everything feel a little less chaotic. The kids are my absolute priority, and I've made a commitment to do everything I can to help them through this. I'm planning to step up in every way possible. More individual and family therapy sessions, more one-on-one time, and even some trips to make new memories together. I'll also involve my family so the kids are surrounded by love and support during this transition. There's one difficult thing I need to address, though. I've been wrestling with the possibility that the kids might not be mine biologically. It's uncomfortable, painful even, but I know I need to do a paternity test. It's not just for me, it's for them. If they aren't biologically mine, there could be medical history they need to know. And what if one day they want to find their biological father? How would they look at me if I just ignored this now? Of course, I hope with everything in me that they're mine, but until I have a definitive answer, it's going to weigh on me. After speaking privately with their therapists, we sat down as a family to talk openly and calmly. We explained the situation in a way they could understand and made sure they felt comfortable asking any questions. I repeated over and over that they could come to me with anything, absolutely anything. I'm your father, I told them. I love you more than anything in this world, and I will always be here for you, no matter what. As for my marriage, I've come to terms with something I've been avoiding for a while. I'll never be able to trust my wife again. Without trust, a relationship simply can't survive. It's the foundation, and ours is irreparably broken. Beyond that, I've realized I don't love her anymore. Not the person she's become. The love I had for her was once so big, so essential to who I was, but her affair destroyed it. She didn't just hurt me. She completely changed how I see her. Could I learn to love her again someday? Maybe. But the truth is, I don't want to. The part of me that once felt joy and happiness at the thought of her is now filled with fear, resentment, and painful memories. The idea of reconnecting with her doesn't just feel wrong. It makes me deeply uncomfortable. The divorce is inevitable, and I want it finalized as soon as possible. As for Monica, we've had a lot of conversations. I've thought about some of the doubts people raised, but the more we talk, the more I think we might have something real here. It's not that I'm rushing into anything, but I feel like we could build something meaningful by dating and taking things slow. I also learned more about her past. She was engaged almost 5 years ago, but her fiancé tragically died in a work accident. It was a devastating loss for her, and while she went on a few dates after that, she couldn't form a deep connection with anyone. It's heartbreaking, but it also explains a lot about why she's been cautious with relationships. From Monica's perspective, life is short, and you have to take chances when a real opportunity comes along. I get where she's coming from, but I explained to her that I'm not ready to start something new yet. I'm still technically married, and I don't want to cross any lines, even if it's just emotional. She completely understood and respected that. We also talked about how things might look to others if we suddenly started openly dating right after the divorce. People could easily twist the story, painting Monica as the homewrecker who destroyed a happy marriage. That's the last thing I want, and Monica agreed. So we made a decision: we're going to wait. Once the divorce is finalized, and I've had some time to process everything, I'll reach out to her. Until then, we're going to keep our distance and avoid any situation that might cause unnecessary drama. Honestly, I'm incredibly attracted to Monica, and even our phone calls are starting to feel like emotional betrayal. That's why I've decided not to contact her again until this chapter of my life is officially closed. When it came to meeting with my wife again, I knew I needed a plan. I wrote down a set of principles for myself, guidelines to follow during the conversation. My goal was to approach it as the person I used to be before this whole nightmare began. I promised myself that I'd stay calm, avoid being cruel, and focus on moving forward. The main objective was clear: to figure out how we could co-parent our kids as effectively and peacefully as possible. That said, I also prepared a list of questions. I wanted to understand what had been going through her mind when she started the affair and how she envisions the future now. Despite everything she's done, I won't stoop to her level. I won't let her behavior define mine. I decided that I want to act in a way I can be proud of, not just today but years from now. I hate her for what she's done to me, to us, and to our kids. But at the same time, I cherish the memories of the good times we shared and the life we built together. Most importantly, I love the children we created and raised as a team. I'm working on seeing her in that light instead of only focusing on the betrayal. I can't carry this hate around forever. It's too heavy. At some point, I'll have to forgive her, not for her sake but for mine, so I can truly move on. Before her affair, I honestly think we had a great marriage. We were close, we spent quality time together, and we were intimate almost every day. It wasn't perfect, but it felt good. Real. That's what makes this so hard to process. How did it all go so wrong? We hardly ever argued. If anything, we both willingly sacrificed for each other. I was an open book with her, until I discovered her infidelity. I always thought she was open with me, too, but now her actions have shown me otherwise. Saturday rolled around, and I went to see her. Her sister had warned me ahead of time that she was in bad shape, and she wasn't exaggerating. My wife looked terrible, her eyes red and swollen, her face puffy, her hair a tangled mess. She seemed so much smaller, like she had physically shrunk under the weight of it all. I could tell she probably hadn't slept or eaten properly in days. We all sat down together, and she was trembling so hard it was almost uncontrollable. Surprisingly, I felt calm. Her pain was obvious, and I sympathized with it, but not as her husband. It felt like watching a character in a tragic movie. Someone whose emotions draw you in but don't truly touch your soul. It was strange, but that moment confirmed something I'd been suspecting. I probably didn't love her anymore. I just sat there, waiting for her to gather herself and speak. She tried a few times, but every time she started, she broke down in tears again. Watching her, I knew this wasn't an act. I've seen her cry before, but never like this. Sure, people can fake tears, but you can't fake the look of someone who's been crying for days on end. The rawness, the snot bubbles, the sheer exhaustion. When she finally managed to start talking, it all came pouring out like a dam bursting. She apologized with almost every word, over and over again. What surprised me was that she didn't try to justify her actions or shift the blame onto me. Her sister, who had been sitting quietly, was crying too. Occasionally, she'd scold my wife between sobs. That's when I learned something I hadn't known before. Her sister had gone through something eerily similar. Apparently, she lost her fiancé a year ago because of her own infidelity. My wife explained that her sister's experience had triggered a kind of midlife crisis for her. It got her thinking about cheating, and eventually, she gave in to temptation. She admitted she'd fallen for the guy, got completely infatuated with him and couldn't stop herself. She said she never believed I'd find out, never thought anyone would get hurt. It was a selfish decision, she admitted. She even claimed she'd been happy in our marriage but convinced herself that she deserved the affair, that I would have understood if I knew how happy it made her in the moment. Her plan, if you can even call it that, was that the affair would run its course and everything would go back to normal. We'd continue our happy married life as if nothing had happened. She confessed that she only started to realize something was wrong when I began pulling away, but by then, it was too late. I also found out she had ended things with her lover about a month and a half ago. The initial euphoria she felt from her affair was fading, replaced by harsh reality. She handed me her phone, offering to let me check it, but it was locked. When I unlocked it, I found messages from a month and a half ago, the last time she'd contacted him. She told me she had tried to focus on making things work between us after ending the affair, but I hadn't shown any interest in her efforts. Until the day I sat her down to talk, she'd clung to the belief that we could fix this, that somehow our marriage would come out stronger. But when I looked into her eyes and told her it was over, the truth hit her like a ton of bricks. That was the moment she finally understood. This wasn't something we could come back from. I asked her questions, trying to make sense of it all. What made you think you had the right to do this to us? To our kids? I pressed her. In the end, her answers all boiled down to pure selfishness. I realized, as many people had already told me, that I would never get the answers I was looking for because they don't exist. There is no good reason for cheating, no explanation that would ever feel acceptable. Still, in a strange way, I found a kind of closure. I told her, plainly and clearly, just how much pain she had caused me, how deeply she had hurt me. She admitted that it was her fault our marriage was destroyed, and she acknowledged that her actions meant our kids would now grow up in a broken home. Her admission brought me an odd sense of peace, like I could finally start moving on. She showed me everything she'd been reading about rebuilding a marriage after infidelity. She even had a signed confession document, framed, as if that would somehow fix things. I didn't bother to read it. I handed it straight to my attorney. She begged over and over again for another chance. She swore she'd do anything to make it right. But I told her I didn't believe her. I don't believe anything she says anymore. She asked me what she could do to fix things. You're the one who broke everything, I told her. If you don't even know how to fix it, how can you expect me to come up with the answer? I turned the question around on her. If you were in my shoes, what would you say? After a long silence, she admitted that if the roles were reversed, she probably wouldn't be able to forgive me either. I told her I'd already done an STD test and planned to have the kids' DNA tested. When she heard that, she completely broke down, crying uncontrollably for 20 minutes. She swore that the affair was the only time she had ever cheated or done anything like that. But after more discussion, she admitted that I had no reason to believe her. If I were in your shoes, she said quietly, I'd do the same thing. I asked if her lover's wife knew about the affair. She said no, but agreed that the woman deserved to know the truth. I asked her who should tell her or me. She hesitated and then asked if I would consider reconciliation or marital therapy if she were the one to tell the lover's wife. I told her no. But, I added, it might restore a little of the respect I've lost for you. Hearing that, she promised to tell the other woman and confess everything, even to HR if necessary. But as she made that promise, I repeated once again, I don't believe you. She swore to me that she'd never be with anyone else and vowed to spend the rest of her life trying to win me back. Even if it took forever, she said, she wouldn't stop. I didn't believe her, but I stayed silent. The conversation devolved into a meaningless cycle of repeated phrases. She offered me what she called a one-way open marriage, full access to all her communication, and 24/7 availability to prove her commitment. I shook my head and told her the truth. I've already talked to Monica, I said, but I'm waiting because I don't want to cheat, and I don't want an open marriage either. It's not something I believe in, and it would hurt you in ways I don't want to hurt anyone. I won't do to someone else what you did to me. I added, I'm not interested in being your probation officer, constantly monitoring you and second-guessing everything. That's not a normal, healthy relationship. And honestly, I'm not interested in intimacy without an emotional connection. It has no value to me. If all I need is physical satisfaction, I can handle that on my own. I don't need a partner for it. By this point, we were both completely drained. The conversation had gone on for over 5 hours, with her crying almost the entire time. Her tears ranged from quiet sobs to full-blown, uncontrollable breakdowns. It was clear that we'd said everything there was to say, and there was no point in going any further. I told her, as clearly as I could, "The love I once had for you is gone. It's dead. I don't even recognize the person you've become. You destroyed our family with your actions, and I am going to see this divorce through. You can't undo what you've done. The only way to avoid this outcome would have been to never start the affair in the first place." I paused, then continued, "I don't want our marriage back. I don't want the pain anymore. I think we need to stop communicating for a while to get some distance and perspective. I've already filed, and my decision is final. We can start family therapy to figure out how to co-parent. But beyond that, I don't want to see you." Saying this to her was excruciating. She sobbed uncontrollably, pleading with me through her tears. "No, no, no. Please, no. Please, no." As I stood to leave, she suddenly had a severe, explosive nosebleed. She reached out for me, but before she could take another step, she passed out. I managed to catch her before she hit the floor. Her sister and I rushed her to the hospital. I stayed there until I knew she was going to be okay, even though every second felt like an emotional knife in my chest. Last night and today, she told everyone what she'd done. This morning, I got a call from her lover's wife, who confirmed that my wife had come clean. She asked for proof, and I sent her copies of the evidence I'd collected. I just found out that she kicked her husband out of the house. The lover's wife wants to meet in person and go over the rest of the evidence. She said she'd had suspicions for a long time but never had anything concrete. I suggested we meet for dinner tomorrow. She wanted to talk more on the phone, but honestly, I'm not sure if I should even bother with any of this anymore. One question keeps spinning in my head. Why prolong the pain? Isn't it better to end it all now so we can start healing and building new lives? And that's it. No big dramatic ending. No revenge. No sense of triumph or peace. Just pain. No happy ending, just more pain dragging on and on. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like.